The signal was faint, nearly swallowed by the static winds of the wasteland, but Jack heard it through the rattling hum of his damaged rover, a soft repetitive pulse buried beneath layers of ruined transmissions. It wasn't from any known human beacon, and that alone made him stop. He pressed his ear to the old speaker and listened again, just to be sure. The coordinates blinked once, then vanished, and the system shut down completely, smoke curling from the panel, like the machine had given up trying to understand what it just heard. Jack stepped out into the biting wind, his boots sinking into dry alien sand, and his eyes locked on the storm-torn horizon, where rusted metal bones of old ships and broken fighters littered the ground. He walked toward the direction he remembered from the coordinates, dragging a worn survival pack across his shoulder. The planet had been left behind years ago, after the last battle between humans and the alien alliance. Nothing was supposed to be alive here. Nothing should be sending signals. Jack climbed over wreckage, scanning the area, his rifle ready, though he doubted anything out here still had the strength to fight. Then he saw her half buried under twisted steel, a small figure barely moving. Her skin was pale, violet streaked with black bruises. Her breathing was sharp like broken glass caught in her lungs. She had one arm twisted unnaturally, the other reaching weakly toward the light. When Jack approached, she flinched, trying to lift her body, but failing. Her eyes met his wide, full of terror and recognition. She was alien, but not like the ones he remembered from battle. Her face was young, soft, not a warrior, more like a child, forced to wear an adult's fear. Help, she whispered in broken English. Please. Jack froze. The translator chip in his ear struggled to process her voice, but the message was clear. She was begging him, even though he should have turned away, even though his orders said any alien survivor should be reported or eliminated. Jack knelt beside her. He wrapped her wounds as best he could and lifted her into his arms. Her body trembled with pain, but she didn't resist. Her eyes never left his face, like she couldn't believe what was happening. His rover was barely working, but it limped back to the hidden shelter he had built months ago inside. He placed her gently on the medcot and activated the emergency scan. The machine beeped, confused by her biology, but stabilized her pulse with heat and basic care. She slept for hours, her body twitching from time to time, as if haunted by things she couldn't escape. When she finally opened her eyes, Jack was there watching, trying to understand what the hell he just did. Her voice was clearer. Now, I am not soldier, I not fight, she said slowly. I escape. Jack didn't speak. He handed her water and watched as she drank in short, careful gulps. What's your name? He asked. After a long silence, Lyra, she said, and then her eyes narrowed slightly, a curious sadness flickering there. Jack, you helped me. Why? Her question hit harder than he expected. Why did he help her? Was it guilt from old wars? Was it loneliness? Maybe he didn't even know himself. Maybe it was just the look in her eyes when she thought she would die alone. He sighed deeply and stood up as he turned to leave. She whispered something that made him stop in his tracks. She said a name, not just any name, but his last name, his full name, a name he had never told her. Her lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears as she said it again. Jack Taylor. Her voice cracked, and something in the room shifted. Jack turned slowly, his heart pounding. How do you know that? He asked. She didn't answer. She just looked at him like the answer was buried in pain, and time, and too many forgotten memories. Jack backed away, unsure if he had saved a stranger or awakened something far bigger than he understood. Outside, the storm raged louder, but inside the shelter, it was quiet, too quiet. Like the universe itself had paused, holding its breath for what came next. Jack paced the small room, unable to stop his thoughts from spiraling. Lyra lay still, her breathing shallow, her skin now glowing faintly under the warm light of the shelter. Her words kept echoing in his mind, the way she said his full name, the way her voice broke, as if she knew him from somewhere or sometime. He never told anyone his full name out here, not even the few humans who passed through the wasteland for scavenging or hiding. Something about the way she looked at him stirred an old ache inside him, a sense that the past was not as buried as he thought. He finally sat down at the edge of the cot and stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was. He reached for his scanner, the same one he used to treat her earlier, and ran it across her arm. This time he adjusted the calibration to analyze her genetic code. The results made no sense. Her DNA was complex, layered with sequences that didn't belong to any species in the known databases. It was like someone had rewritten parts of her genetic script with a code he could not understand. There were markers like ancient warnings, dormant cells, glowing like distant stars waiting to awaken. Jack sat back stunned. She was not just any alien girl, she was something different, maybe even something made or changed. He looked at her face again, trying to imagine the pain she had endured to end up like this and still call for help in his language. She stirred and opened her eyes, her gaze locked on his again, but this time it wasn't fear he saw in her eyes. It was recognition, soft and heavy, like she was seeing a piece of herself in him. Jack asked her quietly, how do you know my name? She blinked slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember it, not know how, but it is there. When I close my eyes and I see your face, I remember it from long time ago. Jack frowned, his hands tightening around the edge of the table. That's not possible. He said more to himself than her. I never met you. I would remember. Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for a hidden answer, not in his words but in the way He breathed the way he existed. You helped me before, she said before the fall. Before the pain, I think maybe another place, maybe another life. Jack shook his head. This was going too far. He had fought in wars. He had seen machines that twisted reality, that made illusions feel like truth, but this felt different. This felt honest. His companel buzzed a weak signal. Breaking through the noise, he opened it and saw a message from Earth Command. His stomach dropped as he read the priority order: neutralize all surviving members of the Zanari species. Do not engage, do not communicate. Destroy on sight. The message came with an encryption key that meant it was not a test or a warning, it was a command. Jack looked at Lyra. She had gone quiet again, staring at the ceiling like she already knew what the message said. He turned off the panel and walked over to her. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. You will kill me now. Jack knelt beside her and said, No, I will not. You are not like them. You were left behind. She nodded, slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. I was an experiment. They made me something else. I was not supposed to survive when I ran. They called me traitor. Jack listened closely, his mind racing. If she had escaped from a lab, then someone out there knew she existed, someone dangerous, and they would not stop. Until she was silenced, he stood up and began packing supplies. We have to move, he said. They will come looking, and if they find you here, we are both dead. She tried to sit up but gasped from the pain. He helped her gently, holding her against his chest. You saved me again, she whispered. Jack didn't reply. He just held her tighter. As the storm outside grew stronger, they slipped out under the cover of night, using the broken terrain to hide their tracks as they moved deeper into the forbidden zone. Every step away from the shelter felt like stepping into a dream. He couldn't wake from a dream where an alien girl called his name before he ever met her, a dream where her blood held codes more complex than any machine could read, and a war might be waiting just beyond the hills, because he chose not to follow the order, because he chose to save her again, and this time, he knew the cost would be everything. The sun on this dead planet never rose fully, it just hung behind the thick clouds, painting the world in pale ash and fading gold. Jack and Lyra moved between shadows, their bodies covered in tattered cloaks, soaked from the poisoned mist that dripped off the twisted alien trees around them. Jack knew they could not stay in one place too long. The command signal he received had a tracking ping buried in it, and the moment he opened it, they might have locked his location. Lyra was weak, but she insisted on walking, her eyes locked forward, her lips tight with something deeper than pain. Jack had seen wounded soldiers before, but this was something else. This was the weight of knowing that everyone wanted you gone, not because of what you did, but because of what you knew. They stopped near a broken transport ship. Its hull split in half, like a cracked skull. Jack crouched and opened a panel in the side, revealing an old medical kit and a rusted scanner. He scanned Lyra again. Her vitals were dropping, and worse, her internal chemistry was changing fast. Parts of her cells were burning out, as if something inside her was shutting down. Like a countdown, he looked into her eyes and asked, What is happening to you? She hesitated, then whispered softly, They put something in me. They wanted me to carry it to your world. I did not know at first, but it grows inside me like a message, like a switch. If I die, it will send a signal. Jack froze. What kind of signal? Lyra looked away. The kind that tells a hidden machine to wake up. A machine, not on this planet, not on any map, a machine made to erase your cities. Jack stood up, fists clenched. How could they do that? How could they use you like that? She shivered and said softly, I was born in a tank, raised with voices in my head. They told me I was a gift, but then they cut me open and took pieces until I ran, until I found silence. Jack helped her sit and pulled a thin blanket around her shoulders. We need to stop this weapon. Where is it? She closed her eyes, her voice a ghost in the wind. I do not know where, but I see it sometimes in dreams. Black metal buried under fire, under mountains, and there are others like me, or there were. I do not know if they live. Jack stared into the distance, realizing they had no time. He had to find a way to extract the device from her, or deactivate it, or warn Earth. But every communication channel was likely monitored. If he tried to contact anyone, they would trace it and send drones to finish the job. A sound snapped his thoughts, sharp clicking boots, soft hissing metal voices in the dark. He motioned for Lyra to stay quiet and ducked behind the wreckage. A group of figures approached, clad in armor too clean for this wasteland. Moving like predators, their eyes glowed faint blue. They spoke in a coded dialect Jack recognized from war bounty hunters sent by the Alien Council. He knew the look. He knew the smell of blood that followed them. They were here for her, he whispered to Lyra, and she nodded, fear flooding her face. Jack pulled his old rifle, the one with cracked sights and too few rounds, and held it tight. If they saw him, they would shoot first. If they saw her, they would drag her back to the place she escaped from, and the world would never know what had been hidden in her bones. The hunters moved closer, scanning the wreckage. Jack's breath slowed, his heart thundered in his ears. He reached into the side panel and activated the ship's emergency flare. A burst of white light exploded upward, drawing the hunters' attention away from them as they ran. Jack pulled Lyra with him into the trees, their feet pounding across the soil as blasts rang out behind them. The forest burned at the edges, but they kept moving, Lyra gasping with each step, her voice thin with terror. They will never stop, Jack. They want what is inside. Me. Jack held her hand tighter, his voice steady. Then we go to them, we find the machine, and we shut it down ourselves, no more. Running. Lyra looked at him, eyes wide. You would die for this. Jack paused for a moment and said, no, I will live for this, and make sure you do too. They disappeared into the fog, leaving behind the smoking trees and shattered silence of the shipwreck. Behind them in the distance, a hunter picked up a piece of cloth torn from Lyra's cloak. He pressed a button on his wrist and a map lit up, showing their path. A new voice spoke through the static. Find the girl, retrieve the code, kill the human. On sight, the hunt had begun. He moved through a narrow canyon where the air shimmered with strange energy, and every step felt like walking through broken time. Jack had never been this deep into the red zone where scanners failed and nothing living dared to stay, but Lyra said she remembered something buried out here, something like a door she had seen in her visions, not a real memory, but one planted in her mind like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Her skin was glowing more now, not just from fever, but from the thing inside her, like it was waking up and reaching out through her cells. Jack knew he could not let her die, not just because of the weapon, but because he had grown to care for her more than he thought possible for someone he was told was the enemy. She was not just alien, she was human in ways most humans had forgotten. They reached an old structure half buried in sand, its walls covered in markings Jack did not recognize, but Lyra stepped forward with shaking hands and pressed her palm against a broken panel. The door opened without sound, revealing a chamber filled with dim blue lights and rows of machines humming like sleeping beasts. Jack followed her inside, eyes wide at the tech that pulsed with life despite years of silence. This is it, she said. This is where they made me, where they broke me and left me, and where the machine was tested. Jack moved toward the center, where a platform rose slowly from the ground, a circular bed with restraints stained with dried blood. Lyra stepped back, trembling. I remember pain. They used me here again and again to find the right frequency. Jack looked around, searching for a terminal, something he could use to shut it down, but the system responded only to her touch. She sat on the platform, breathing hard, her eyes closed as cables slithered from the walls and connected to her spine. He shouted to stop her, but she said, it is the only way. If I link fully, I can find the weapon and shut it down from inside. Jack hesitated. He knew this could kill her, but they had no choice. He held her hand tightly and said, if anything happens, I will pull you out even if the place burns. She smiled weakly and nodded. Then her body jerked as the machine surged to life. Her eyes rolled back and the lights in the room flickered. Jack saw a screen light up with images. Not just maps or data, but memories. Lyra's childhood, or what passed for one, flashes of surgery, Needle's voices speaking in numbers, her escaping, bleeding. From her side, running through fire, she screamed suddenly, and Jack grabbed her shoulders, trying to keep her steady. The machine was showing her everything, unlocking what had been sealed. She gasped and whispered coordinates under the ocean of the third moon. They hid the core. They're guarded by drones and a failsafe. If I die, it activates. Jack memorized the location and begged her to disconnect, but she shook her head. Not yet, there is something more. They buried a second code, deep in my mind. A trap for anyone who tries to copy it. If I do not release it manually, the weapon will detonate even if disabled from the outside. Jack cursed under his breath, realizing the horror of it all. They had made her into a living bomb, and now she was the only key to saving both their worlds. Then, something changed. The machines around them started to move, arms, unfolding weapons, locking onto Jack. Lyra's voice went sharp. It is a defense system. If it senses a human, it tries to purge. Jack raised his rifle and fired at the nearest turret, sparks flying as he pulled her off the platform. She screamed in pain, the cables ripping from her back as blood poured down her spine, but she was alive. Barely. The chamber shook as the system began a countdown. Unknown language scrolling across the walls. Jack carried her through the narrow halls, dodging beams and falling debris until they burst into the light outside. He fell to the ground, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest. I found it, Jack, she whispered. I know where it is now, but we have little time. Jack wiped the blood from her face and said, then we finished this together. No more running, no more hiding. She looked at him through the tears and said, you are not like them. You are not like the ones who built war. You are like the ones in the stories I heard before they made me forget. Jack smiled through the fear and said, maybe we write our own story now, one they cannot erase. Above them in the red sky, a ship moved slowly, scanning the land, searching, hunting. The clock had begun ticking louder than ever before. Rain came down in oily sheets as Jack and Lyra pushed through the jungle that had overtaken the lower valleys. Vines glowed faintly underfoot, pulsing with alien life as if the entire forest were breathing around them. They had little time left. The coordinates, she whispered after the mind link led them here, to a ruined bunker built into the mountain, carved with strange symbols, half-eaten by nature. In silence, Jack scanned the area, using old military tech shielding their location from drones above, but he knew it was only a matter of minutes before someone caught up to them. Lyra was weaker, now her legs trembling, her skin burning with fever. The machine had taken more from her than she admitted, yet she pressed on each step, a promise to finish what was started long before she was born. The bunker door was sealed shut with a lock Jack had never seen before. Lyra raised her hand, placed it over the symbols, and whispered a word. Not in English, not in any known tongue, but the door responded, unfolding with a slow hiss as if it had been waiting for her for years. Inside, the air was cold and dry lights flickered dimly along the corridor, revealing rows of panels and machines, humming softly. A quiet death trapped in wires. Jack kept his weapon ready as they moved deeper into the base, following a path only she seemed to know. Then they reached it, a chamber filled with light and shadow. At the center was a pillar, and inside the pillar floated a black sphere, pulsing with slow, terrible energy. The weapon, Lyra said, her voice barely audible. They called it the reset, something that would wipe thought, not just life. Jack stared at it. Frozen by the sheer wrongness of the thing, he could feel it in his bones, in his blood, like gravity bending in the wrong direction. How do we shut it down? He asked. She looked at the panel beside it, her fingers trembling. It takes to one with the code, one with intent. The machine reads thoughts, emotions, choices. If it senses betrayal, it will detonate. Jack stepped forward without hesitation. Tell me what to do. She began pressing commands, blood dripping from her fingers as small needles emerged. From the console, Jack winced, but placed his hand there to the machine, pricked his skin, and a burning sensation rushed through his veins. He saw flashes, not his memories but hers. Pain, darkness, cages, metal hands, voices telling her she was nothing. Jack shouted to stay focused. She cried out and entered the final code. Then something clicked. The sphere stopped moving, but then the lights turned red, an alarm began to sound. Someone else was in the system. They tried to override it. Lyra screamed and fell to the ground. Jack grabbed her. As the chamber trembled and the sound of boots echoed from behind, a familiar voice rang out cold and sharp. It was Commander Wraith, a man Jack once trusted, a human working now for the Alien High Council. You really thought you could stop this, Jack? You really thought saving one broken thing would change the plan? Jack stood his body in front of Lyra, aiming his weapon. You betrayed your own kind. Wraith laughed. No, Jack, I just evolved. The humans need a purge. They need control, and this weapon gives us that order. Jack fired first. Striking the console behind Wraith, sparks flew. The guards opened fire. Jack rolled, grabbing Lyra, pulling her behind. The pillar returned fire, he yelled, and for a moment the world blurred in smoke and screams. Jack threw a grenade and charged forward, catching Wraith off guard. They clashed fists, colliding, bones snapping. Jack saw nothing but Lyra's face behind his eyes, and the rage of every lie they told him. Wraith slammed him against the wall, sneering. She is not worth this, Jack snarled. She is worth more than you ever were, and drove his blade into Wraith's chest. The man gasped and fell silent. Jack turned to see Lyra crawling to the console, trying to stabilize the shutdown. I can stop it, she said, but I must stay connected. It needs a constant override pulse. Jack shook his head. There has to be another way. She smiled, tears running down her face. No, Jack, this is the way. You saved me, let me save them. Her hand reached for his. He took it, holding it tight until the room glowed brighter. The weapon faded slowly until only silence remained. Lyra's body went limp. Jack screamed, holding her close. The weapon was dead. The war ended, but she was gone, or so he thought, until her chest moved once. Barely breathing, Jack lifted her in his arms and walked out of the burning bunker, carrying more than just a girl. He carried the proof that humanity could still choose love over power and hope over destruction. Behind them the jungle whispered, and the stars above finally blinked without fear. For the first time in years, Jack moved through the ash-covered valley, carrying Lyra against his chest. Her heartbeat was shallow, barely there, like a fading signal trying to reach a receiver too far away. The sky above had turned dark, not with clouds but with silence. The weapon was gone. The signal was dead, but the aftermath was far from over. The world might not end today, but it had cracked open in ways no one could unsee. He found an old transport pod resting near the cliffs and forced the door open, placing her inside gently. He activated the med system. It flickered, unsure of her species but still responded to her vitals. The machine injected stabilizers and hummed softly, wrapping her in warmth. Jack watched the readings, praying to a sky he no longer believed in. He had seen friends die, lovers vanish, commanders betray everything for control. But now, as he watched Lyra fight for every breath, something inside him refused to break. She had fought to stay alive, not just for herself, but for a world that would never thank her. She had become something more than a weapon, more than a survivor. She had become human, in ways that no species could define. Hours passed, maybe longer. Time blurred. Jack cleaned his gear, watched the sensors, and waited. Finally, her eyes fluttered open. Barely moving her fingers, she whispered something. He leaned close, and she said softly, "Did we win?" Jack smiled through tears. "We stopped the weapon. We stopped them." Lyra tried to sit, but winced. Jack gently lowered her back. "You need rest. The override nearly killed you." She nodded, and closed her eyes again, not in fear, but in peace. Jack activated the old signal tower on the pod, sending out a pulse one only resistance channels would recognize. Not Earth Command, not the ones who issued the kill orders, but those who still remembered what it meant to fight for truth. A few days passed. The signal was answered. A ship landed nearby, unmarked. Fast, silent, two figures stepped out. One was an old friend of Jack's named Kara, once a medic, now a ghost. In the rebellion, she looked at Lyra with narrowed eyes. Then back at Jack. You trust her? Jack said she saved us. Kara nodded slowly, then helped load her onto the ship inside. They treated her with care, the way no one else had ever done before. Jack stayed at her side, even when they landed at the hidden station, orbiting Juno Prime, a neutral zone full of exiles, smugglers and those who no longer fit in any war. Kara arranged for a memory scan of Lyra, a delicate process that would allow them to find the remaining fragments of the weapons code and ensure it was never rebuilt. Lyra agreed, her voice stronger now, but her eyes holding a sadness Jack had seen before. Not everyone wanted her alive. Even now some called her a threat, others a miracle. The council sent agents offering deals, silence, bribes, threats. Jack refused them all. One night as the stars spun slowly around the station, Jack sat with Lyra on the observation deck, watching the void stretch endlessly around them. She turned to him and asked softly, "Why did you help me back then?" Jack stared into the black, thinking of all the moments he could have walked away. He said, "Because you looked at me like I was worth saving even when you were the one dying." She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers cold but steady. "You gave me something. I never had a choice." Jack looked at her eyes, filled with emotion. "Then you keep choosing life. Fight. He'll be more than what they made you to be." She nodded, her face calm for the first time since he found her on that battlefield. The next day she stood before the Council of Free Worlds, not to plead for mercy, but to share her story, raw, honest, and filled with pain. She showed them what they had created, what they had almost unleashed, and how one human chose compassion over orders. The room was silent when she finished. Then one by one, leaders began to stand. Not all in support, but in recognition of truth, a truth no weapon could erase. Jack watched from the edge of the room as she walked out head high, her steps uncertain but her path now her own. That night, under the artificial sky of the station, she whispered to Jack, "They will come again, someone always does." And Jack replied, "Then we will be ready. And this time, they will not face soldiers or machines. They will face those who remember what it means to choose something greater than fear and power." And silence above them, a new message began to spread across systems. A story not of war, but of one girl, one choice, and one man who refused to stop believing in something better. A story that would not be erased, not this time, not ever. Passed since the chamber burned, since Jack carried her through smoke and silence, and something in both of them changed, not just in their bodies but in their spirits. Once fractured, once wired for survival, now they moved like people who had found a reason to live more than to fight. Lyra walked on her own now, no wires, no restraints. Her skin had healed, though the scars still etched her back like a memory written in fire. The rebel station orbiting Juno Prime had become a sanctuary, a place where species who had once fired at each other now shared meals and silence and plans. Jack had been offered a dozen medals, a dozen new uniforms, all from people who never bled beside him. He refused them all. Instead, he worked with Kara in the station labs, helping rebuild damaged medical drones, teaching new recruits how to spot lies in reports, how to listen for truth. Beneath protocol, he became a man of quiet fire, of presence rather than noise. Lyra spent her days between learning and speaking, helping heal those who were treated like weapons or ghosts. She gave voice to survivors of other experiments, those who were abandoned like her, left to rot in places no one dared to look, and when she spoke they listened, not just to her words, but to the strength that never came from power, only from pain endured and transformed. One evening, Jack sat outside the outer ring of the station, looking at a small garden the botanists were growing. Earth plants, alien moss, the mix made no sense, and that was what made it beautiful. Lyra joined him, barefoot, quiet, sitting beside him. Their shoulders touched, but they did not speak right away. Finally, Jack said softly, "We stopped one war, but more are waiting." She nodded. "Always, but now they know we are not easy to twist, not easy to kill." He looked at her, then said, "You remember more each day, don't you?" She breathed in deeply. "Yes, memories that are mine now, not just ones they gave me. I remember my dreams, to now not just what they told me to dream." She turned to him, eyes steady, and asked, "If you could go back, would you still pull me out of that wreck? Would you still carry me?" Even knowing all this, Jack smiled without hesitation. "I would do it again, 1,000 times. You saved me." To Lyra, "Not just with your code or your sacrifice, but with your will, with your hope." She leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes watching the stars. "You know, Jack, sometimes I think they did not fail when they tried to make me a weapon. They just made the wrong kind. They made someone who saw too much, felt too deep, and in the end chose to live instead of destroy." Jack laughed softly. "Sounds like the kind of weapon this galaxy needs." The station speakers echoed softly with an incoming message, an unknown signal bouncing through secured frequencies. Kara's voice came through, alert and firm. "We have a visitor approaching. One ship, no weapons." Requesting to speak with the girl, Jack and Lyra stood together. Walking back into the station, the halls lit with warm golden light and gentle humming engines. They reached the main bay, where the ship hovered, sleek, silent, unfamiliar, but not threatening. A figure emerged, tall, cloaked, no armor, just cloth that shimmered like it held light and shadow in equal Measure the being stepped forward, removed their hood, revealing a face that shifted gently between human and alien features, as if two worlds lived in one skin. I come not to harm, the voice said, but to learn to unlearn. I carry questions, not commands. Jack stepped between them, hand on his belt, watching every move, but Lyra raised her hand. It is all right, she said. I will hear them. They spoke for hours, not of politics, not of weapons, but of purpose. The visitor was part of a faction, once loyal to the enemy council, but now scattered, disillusioned, searching for something more. They had heard whispers of a girl who had survived, of a human who had defended her, of a weapon that was not fired, and a war that was not completed. They asked her, how did you break your chains? Lyra answered, not with a formula, not with rebellion, but with truth. I remembered that I was more than what they made me, and someone believed it before I could. The visitor nodded, left behind a small crystal of ancient data, and returned to their ship. Before disappearing into the void, Jack and Lyra stood in the empty bay for a long time, not saying anything until Jack broke the silence. You think others will come? Lyra nodded. They will, some to listen, some to hunt, but we are no longer alone, and neither are they. She took his hand, held it without fear, without doubt. In that moment, under the artificial sky and the hum of stars, they both knew something had changed, not just in the galaxy but in themselves. They were not soldiers anymore, not refugees, not enemies. They were survivors, builders, witnesses of a story that had begun with blood and silence and ended with a choice to love, to protect, to live. The end wind was soft across the green hills of a reborn world. Grass swayed where once fire had burned, where once machines had torn silence into the ground, and now laughter echoed. Children ran without knowing the weight that once threatened to erase their tomorrow. Above them, the sky held no ships, no war, no alarms, just clouds moving like breath, slow and alive. Jack stood near the edge of the old outpost, now a memorial carved from stone, and memory people came here now to remember not the battles but the mercy that stopped them, to touch the names etched into the walls, names of those who chose life over vengeance, who chose each other over fear. Among them, carved deep and bold, were two names, Jack and Lyra. Beside those names were no ranks, no titles, just a single word, together. Lyra walked toward him, her dress light, her steps certain, her eyes still carrying stars and storms, and the calm that followed both. She smiled as she reached him, held out her hand, and he took it. The wind played with her hair, lifting it like a whisper. She looked out at the fields, at the distant towers rising from the soil, where life was being grown from the ruins of despair. They do not need to know everything, she said softly. They just need to know that it was possible. Jack nodded and replied, and that we were real. She leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, and in that silence, everything they had endured, everything they had become, everything they had saved, became a story, not of war, not of species, not of death, but of what happens when one person refuses to walk away from another. When one voice breaks the silence and says, you are not alone anymore. The trees danced, the wind sang, the stars blinked, and the world turned forward, not back. And in the center of it all, two souls stood unshaken, unforgotten, unafraid. The end.